The biggest liar in the room is not always the person who talks the most, nor the one who slams the table, raises their voice, or walks in with eyes sharp as knives. Sometimes it is the person who sinks low into a chair, shoulders slightly folded inward, a tissue twisted in their hand, eyes red but not yet spilling tears, fragile enough that the whole room feels responsible for protecting them before anyone thinks to ask what actually happened. Emily Hart understood that on a cold Sunday evening in Columbus, Ohio, 3 weeks before her brother's wedding, when the Hart family kitchen was filmed with a thin layer of steam on the windows, when the smell of roast meat, mashed potatoes, and onion gravy was still warm enough to feel almost insulting against the chill spreading across the dinner table. That room had once been the safest place in Emily's memory. It was where she had done math homework while her mother made soup, where Daniel had once pulled Lily's loose baby tooth with a piece of thread, and the whole family had laughed until they could barely breathe, where Frank Hart read the Sunday paper, and Marianne Hart always said there was nothing so terrible that a family dinner could not soften it a little. But that night, Emily's familiar chair near the corner of the table no longer felt like the seat of a daughter coming home for dinner. It felt like the defendant's chair. On the table, beside a salad no one had touched and a glass of water leaving a damp trail down the tablecloth, lay a printed statement from the bank. The numbers were circled in red pen. A withdrawal from Marianne's medical care account sat cold beneath the yellow light, and in the memo line were the initials EH, like a handprint already placed on Emily's collar. Natalie Vale sat beside Marianne in a pale blue dress, her brown hair loosely tied back, her eyes red, one hand resting near Emily's mother's hand but not quite touching it, as if she were afraid even her comfort might make things worse. Daniel stood behind Natalie's chair instead of sitting, one hand on the chair back, his body leaning slightly toward her in the posture of a man who believed he was standing between the woman he loved and a threat coming from his own family. Frank sat at the head of the table, both hands resting on his napkin, his eyes fixed on his water glass as though if he stared long enough at the melting ice, he would not have to look at his daughter. Lily sat across the table with her arms folded, her young face pulled tight by a kind of confusion Emily recognized at once. Lily did not necessarily hate her. Lily had simply heard enough before Emily arrived to be afraid that loving her sister right now might put her on the wrong side. Natalie drew in a tiny breath, shaky just enough for everyone to hear, then said in a voice that sounded almost broken, "I don't want to believe Emily could do something like this." Emily looked at the paper, at the numbers, at the name attached to her in a way both clumsy and precise, then looked around the dinner table where she had once laid out her mother's medication, cut her father's birthday cake, bought Christmas gifts, and signed all 3 siblings' names, cleared plates after every meal because if she did not, everyone else would leave them there until morning. And in that moment what made her go cold was not being accused. What made her go cold was realizing the room had already chosen Natalie's feelings as truth before Emily could finish a single sentence. Emily Hart was not the kind of person who made a room automatically turn toward her when she walked in. She was 33, a records coordinator at a pediatric clinic in Columbus, a job no one in her family fully understood. They only knew she did hospital paperwork, as if that meant sitting behind a desk and stamping forms, not spending all day talking to exhausted parents, cold insurance systems, busy doctors and appointment schedules pushed farther out while children were still feverish, still hurting, still needing someone to remember the right file code. Emily was good at things that had no beauty. She remembered deadlines, backup phone numbers, which medications could not be taken together, and that her father had once used the name of his favorite football team as a password, so when he locked himself out of the utility account, she guessed the security answer immediately. In the Hart family, Daniel was the eldest, a construction engineer, the one mentioned at gatherings as proof that the Harts had raised their children well. He owned a house, had a deep voice, knew how to talk to the contractor fixing their father's porch roof, and knew how to stand upright in moments when the room needed a man to decide something. Lily was the youngest, 24, freshly out of school, bright and soft and easy to forgive, because she was still learning how to be an adult. Emily was in the middle, not dazzling enough to be shown off, not fragile enough to be held, and so she became part of the house's infrastructure. When Marianne developed an autoimmune illness, Emily was the one who made the medication chart with colored paper, labeled each pill box, set alarms in her mother's phone, and called insurance to argue about a medication the person on the other end of the line could not even pronounce correctly. When Frank forgot to renew the car insurance, Emily found the warning email in his spam folder, paid the late fee, then texted him to send her the money back later, though he later forgot both the repayment and the fact that she had saved him from a penalty. When Daniel was busy at a job site, Emily bought Marianne's birthday flowers, chose the exact white chrysanthemums her mother liked, wrote the card and texted him, "I put your name on it too, remember to call Mom tonight." When Lily needed the deposit for her first apartment, Emily transferred the money first, then told their mother Lily had handled it herself, because she knew her little sister hated being treated like a child by the whole family. Emily did not keep score, not because she was perfectly noble, but because she had been trained since childhood to believe that keeping score made love ugly. She loved through things completed quietly, through clean dishes after dinner, through bills that did not go late, through doctor's appointments that were not missed, through the words, "It's okay," spoken before an argument could take shape. And because she never named what she did, the whole family slowly forgot there was anything to name. They only saw that Emily was fine. A person who was fine did not need to be asked first. A person who was fine could withstand being misunderstood a little longer. A person who was fine, if she hurt, should hurt neatly, without staining the tablecloth. Natalie Vale entered the Hart family at a November dinner, carrying a homemade apple pie and the soft glow of someone who knew how to make people feel kinder for loving her. She wore a cream sweater, her brown hair tied low, her short nails painted pale pink, her eyes always lingering on the person she spoke to just a little longer. Not long enough to be uncomfortable, only long enough to make them feel heard. Daniel brought her in like something precious crossing a threshold. He kept one hand lightly on her back as he introduced everyone. And Emily, standing by the stove with a dish towel in her hand, saw her brother look several years younger simply because someone was looking at him as though he were the only man in the world who knew how to make her safe. Natalie called Marianne Mom Hart the second time they met. After she said it, she blushed, covered her mouth, and apologized because maybe it was too soon, but Marianne laughed and took her hand, saying this family did not measure things like that. Natalie complimented Frank on the warmth of his storytelling voice when he mentioned his years teaching high school literature. She asked Lily about her new job and even remembered the name of a coworker Lily had mentioned only once in passing. When Marianne asked what Natalie's family was like, Natalie lowered her eyes, her smile dimming by exactly the right amount, and said her parents had divorced when she was young. That holidays for her had usually meant a suitcase between two apartments, cold dinners, and promises no one kept. "I don't want to make anyone sad," she said, her voice soft, as if apologizing for bringing a wound into someone else's home. "It's just, I've never really known a house that smelled like Sunday dinner." Marianne softened almost instantly. Frank said she was always welcome. Lily looked at Natalie with the eyes of a young woman who had just met the main character of a story about healing. Emily wanted to like Natalie too. She truly did. She had watched Daniel be lonely for years, had seen him come home on Thanksgiving with a smile that was just a little stiff, had heard him say that love now made him tired, because everyone wanted him to prove something. If Natalie made him happy, Emily wanted to open her heart. But during that same dinner, when Daniel mentioned that Natalie had once worked at a financial company, Emily asked naturally, "What area were you in? Loan files, client services, or compliance?" Natalie did not answer with a company name, a job title, or a timeline. She looked down at her plate, pushed a piece of potato with her fork, and smiled sadly. "Somewhere I don't really like remembering. The people there made me feel like I always had to prove I wasn't a bad person." The answer softened the whole table. Marianne immediately changed the subject. Daniel squeezed Natalie's shoulder. Lily looked at Emily as though her sister had just pressed a cold hand against someone's bruise. Emily blamed herself for asking too directly, but a part of her, the part that worked with records all day and knew the difference between an answer and an evasion, filed away the first thing. Natalie could turn a specific question into a room where the person asking felt rude for needing information. In the months that followed, Natalie did not attack Emily with one obvious stab. She left tiny scratches so fine that if Emily held them up to the light, everyone would ask why she was inspecting so closely. One evening, Marianne texted the family group that her new medication was making her dizzy, and Natalie immediately offered to take her to the doctor the next day in Daniel's place, because he had a job site meeting. Emily texted Natalie privately, "Thank you. Just make sure to ask Mom before changing any medication schedule, because the doctor is tracking her reaction this week." It was an ordinary note, not cold, not accusing. But that night Daniel called Emily, his voice pressed low like a man trying not to be angry, and said Natalie had cried in the car because she felt Emily did not trust her enough to take care of Marianne. Emily reopened the message, read every word, and said, "I didn't say that." Daniel replied, "I know you didn't use those exact words, but the way you said it made her feel controlled." That phrase became the first door into the maze, made her feel. Emily could dispute a sentence, but how could she dispute a feeling without looking cruel? Another time, when the family was discussing wedding plans, Emily gently said the venue Natalie liked had a very high deposit, and since Daniel was still paying off the house repairs, maybe they should look at a few more options. Natalie stayed silent for the rest of dinner, then went into the kitchen to help Marianne wash dishes. Afterward, Marianne pulled Emily into the hallway and said Natalie felt Emily thought she did not deserve a beautiful wedding. "I'm not saying you're completely wrong," Marianne said, smoothing her sleeve the way she always did when she wanted to keep the peace. "But Natalie is sensitive. You talk about money a little dryly." Emily wanted to say money was dry, that deposits did not become softer just because someone cried, but she saw her mother's hands slightly swollen from illness, saw the tiredness in her face, and nodded. Another evening, Emily came late after work, her head aching from a full day of angry parents and a little boy whose appointment had to be postponed because insurance had not approved it yet. She greeted everyone, then sat down quietly. Natalie later told Lily she felt Emily did not welcome her, that perhaps she had stepped into a sensitive position in the family too quickly. Lily texted Emily, "Can you be a little nicer to Natalie? She's really trying." Emily read the message while sitting on the floor of her living room, sorting Marianne's medication bills by month, and wanted to laugh but could not. Natalie never said, "Emily hates me." She said, "I feel, maybe. I don't want to cause trouble." And that softness made each sentence hard to untangle. A clear accusation could be answered. A wounded feeling made the Hart family kneel down to wipe the spill, before asking who had knocked the glass over. Emily tried to fix herself before she ever thought to suspect Natalie. She invited Natalie for coffee at a little place near the clinic, where the wooden tables were always slightly sticky with sugar, and the barista had written her name as Emily for 3 straight years. She bought Natalie a pale gray wool scarf as an early birthday gift, sent her a list of wedding florists, offered to review the venue contract because she was used to reading paperwork. Natalie accepted everything with beautiful gratitude, but when they were alone, she often said things just vague enough to knock Emily off balance. At the cafe, after Emily said she was genuinely happy Daniel was happy, Natalie stirred her latte for a long time and said, "I know you're used to being the most important woman in his life." Emily looked up. "What do you mean by that?" Natalie immediately widened her eyes as if the sentence had been taken in a direction she had never intended. "Nothing. I'm just trying to understand where I fit. I've always been a little scared entering someone else's family." Emily sat there, her throat tight. If she pushed, she would look territorial. If she stayed quiet, the sentence remained there, doing its work. Another time, when Emily gently asked whether Natalie still kept in touch with old friends in Cincinnati, since Daniel had said her guest list was small, Natalie lowered her voice and said, "There was someone named Grace. But I don't want to talk about her. It took me a long time to stop feeling crazy because of her." Emily asked what Grace had done. Natalie smiled sadly. "You ask questions like she did, always needing details to decide whether I'm telling the truth." The sentence made Emily blush with shame, even though she had done nothing wrong. A few weeks later, when Emily asked Daniel whether he knew much about Natalie's old friends, he frowned. "Are you investigating her?" The word investigating sounded ugly, cold, like something a jealous sister would do. Emily told herself she was probably being too guarded. She told herself Natalie had been hurt before and misunderstood things easily. She told herself that if she were kinder, clearer, softer, all these misunderstandings would dissolve. That was her first mistake. The mistake of people who are used to preserving peace by adjusting their own voice first. She did not understand that Natalie did not need her to be cruel. Natalie only needed her to be afraid of looking cruel. Natalie learned the Hart family faster than they learned her. She knew Marianne liked to be needed, especially since illness had made her feel like a burden, so Natalie called her Mom Hart, asked for her roast chicken recipe, sent short prayerful messages in the morning, and always laid a hand on Marianne's wrist when she spoke. A gesture that made Marianne feel she was still the warm center of a home. She knew Frank hated conflict, so whenever tension rose she said, "I don't want this family divided because of me," making Frank automatically want to end the conversation instead of find the truth. She knew Daniel wanted to be the man who protected a fragile woman from the world, so she always let him see her tremble. but never trembled too long in front of anyone else. She knew Lily was at an age when she wanted to believe families could expand through love rather than caution. So Natalie asked Lily about work and told her she was brave for trying new things, while Emily usually only asked whether Lily had submitted her health insurance forms. And she knew Emily was the only one who might see the structure. So before Emily could give that structure a name, Natalie began assigning her the role of difficult, not with an explosion, with thread after thread, a sentence repeated with half of it missing, red eyes after leaving a room with Emily, an apology in front of everyone, I know you didn't mean to make me feel small, a late-night text to Daniel, I don't want to put you in the middle of me and Emily, a comment to Marianne, I think she's just scared of losing her role in the family. None of it was enough to be called cruel. But after 3 months, every reaction Emily had passed through a layer of interpretation Natalie had already spread over it. If Emily mentioned money, she was controlling. If Emily was quiet, she was cold. If Emily asked for details, she was suspicious. If Emily tried to be friendly, Natalie said she was trying, but it doesn't feel real. A person trapped inside a frame like that soon begins editing herself. Emily started rereading texts before sending them, removing periods because they looked blunt, adding emojis because she worried she sounded cold, texting "you did great" to Natalie after things she was not even sure had been done well. She did not realize she was slowly living as though she were under review inside her own family. Marianne's medical account was the door Natalie walked through under the cover of kindness. It was not large enough to look tempting from the outside, but for the Hart family it was a safety line for medication, tests, co-pays, and small expenses that repeated so often they made illness feel expensive. Emily managed it because she understood insurance codes, how to download bills, and the payment portals that seemed designed to make older people give up. One Tuesday afternoon, after Natalie had taken Marianne to a doctor's appointment in Daniel's place, she stood in the Hart kitchen holding a pharmacy bag, watching Emily relabel her mother's pillboxes. "Could you show me how to pay online?" Natalie asked softly. "Just in case you're busy. I don't want to bother you every time." Emily hesitated. Not because she thought Natalie would steal, but because anything involving her mother's account made her careful. Natalie noticed the hesitation immediately, but did not look offended. She only gave a small smile and looked down at the pharmacy bag. "It's okay, I understand, I'm still new." Marianne, sitting at the kitchen table and tired after the appointment, heard that and said, "Emily, show Natalie, she's trying to help. I don't want everything falling on you." It was the last sentence that softened Emily. "I don't want everything falling on you." She had waited her whole life for something like that. She did not give the full password, but she took out a sheet of paper and wrote the login process, the bank name, where to find bills, how to download receipts, and a few hints for the security questions if the system locked. She wrote in her neat handwriting, explaining each step, then went into the kitchen to get her mother water. When she came back, Natalie was standing beside the table, one hand resting near her phone, which lay face down. Nothing looked suspicious. It was only one tiny second. But months later, when Emily remembered it, the image would shine coldly like a crime scene photo. The instruction sheet on the table, Natalie's phone at exactly the angle needed to capture it, Marianne tired enough to have her eyes closed, and Emily too busy, being useful to protect the very thing she was holding. Natalie took over the role of ideal daughter through things people could see. She brought flowers to Marianne. Not expensive flowers, only tulips or small daisies, but always placed them in the vase where the kitchen light touched them, so whenever relatives came over, everyone noticed. She sat beside Marianne at church, linked arms with her in the parking lot, took photos of the two of them with captions like "Found family is still family." She texted things like, "Mom Hart, remember to drink warm water today," or "I'm praying your hands hurt less today." Marianne read those messages aloud to Emily with emotion in her voice. Emily still did the less beautiful work, calling insurance because medication had been denied, arguing with the lab over a wrong charge, waiting on hold for 38 minutes to ask why a bill she had already paid still showed overdue, scheduling follow-ups on the exact days Daniel was free to drive their mother, and then texting him 3 times so he would not forget. Once Emily came over after work, placed a neatly organized packet of papers on the table, and explained to Frank how to submit a new claim. Natalie sat beside Marianne, gently rubbing her wrist. Marianne looked at Natalie and said to Aunt Susan over the phone, "That girl really has a heart. She takes such care of me." Emily heard it while slipping receipts into a folder, and something small and ugly pinched inside her chest, so petty it made her ashamed. Natalie glanced over, smiled, and laid a hand on Emily's shoulder. "I learned from you," she said. To everyone else, it sounded like praise. To Emily, it sounded like a gentle announcement that Natalie had acquired the language of care. Emily had never known how to make beautiful, and if Emily tried to take it back, she would look like a woman jealous of the love being given to her own mother. The wedding money envelope disappeared on a Saturday afternoon, when the whole family gathered at the Hart house to handle the final wedding day details. Aunt Susan brought over a cream-colored envelope with cash inside, her contribution to help Daniel pay the venue deposit, because she had no children of her own, and had always treated the 3 Hart siblings like her nieces and nephew. Marianne's hands hurt that day, so she asked Emily to put the envelope in the kitchen drawer where the family usually kept papers that needed attention. Emily put it there in front of Lily and Natalie, then returned to the table to check the guest list. 2 days later, Marianne called Emily in a strange voice, asking whether she remembered where she had put the envelope. Emily said it was in the drawer. Marianne went silent. That evening, the family found the envelope in Emily's tote bag hanging in the Hart laundry room, with half the money missing. The feeling was not like being slapped, it was like falling through a floor she had thought was solid wood. Emily stood in the laundry room, the smell of detergent and damp towels around her, staring at the envelope in Frank's hand. "I didn't take it," she said too quickly, too directly, sounding like someone accused before anyone had even spoken. Natalie stood behind Daniel, one hand over her mouth, her eyes full of tears that had not fallen yet. "Maybe she just put it there by mistake when she was tired," Natalie said very softly. "Please don't embarrass her." That was more poisonous than an accusation. If Natalie had said Emily stole it, Emily could have argued. But Natalie spoke as if she were protecting her, and that protection planted a thought in everyone's mind. Maybe Emily was tired, stressed, confused. Maybe she had done something and did not want to admit it. Frank said not to make a big deal of it. Marianne cried because the wedding money was missing, but kept saying there must be some misunderstanding. Daniel looked at Emily in a way she had never seen before, angry, disappointed, and almost frightened of the ugly thought forming inside him about his own sister. Lily asked quietly, "Are you sure?" That question stayed with Emily longer than the envelope. "Are you sure?" As if her memory was now something that had to be verified, Daniel chose Natalie during a private conversation with Emily in the backyard, where the air was cold enough that their breath blurred in front of them. Emily asked him to listen to her. Really listen, not listen while preparing a defense. She told him every detail, the twisted text messages, the cafe comment, how easily the envelope had appeared in her bag, how Natalie was always nearby when misunderstandings happened. Daniel listened for a few minutes, then his face closed. "Do you know how much she's cried because of you?" he asked. Emily stared at him, stunned. "Have you ever asked how many times I've cried?" Daniel went quiet for a beat, then exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck the way he did when he was tired from work. "You're always strong." He had not said it to hurt her. Maybe that was why it hurt more. "You're always strong." Because she was strong, she could withstand being doubted a little longer. Because she was strong, Natalie's tears weighed more than Emily's trembling. Because she was strong, no one stood behind her chair at the dinner table. Emily said, "Strong doesn't mean I don't get hurt." Daniel shook his head. "I think you can't stand that I finally have someone who chooses me first." She stepped back as if something heavy had struck her chest. Daniel had never said that before. But Natalie had planted it somewhere in him, and watered it long enough for him to believe it was his own thought. Emily wanted to scream, wanted to tell him how many times she had chosen him by buying the gifts he forgot, reminding him to call, covering for him when he missed family things. But if she listed those things, it would sound like collecting a debt from love, so she only said, "You just proved she won." Daniel frowned. "This isn't a competition." Emily looked through the kitchen window, where Natalie stood beside Marianne, her head slightly lowered, her posture tender as if she were only a girl wanting to be loved. "It is to her," Emily said. Daniel turned away. The medical money disappeared slowly, long enough not to be noticed right away, steadily enough that by the time anyone saw it, suspicion already had somewhere to cling. Marianne received a notice that a medication payment had been declined because the account was short. Emily checked and found several small withdrawals over 6 weeks. None of them large, with notes like pharmacy reimbursement, family transfer, insurance adjustment, and a few lines ending with EH. The login history showed the account had been accessed through the Hart home Wi-Fi on days Emily had been there, and a few times from an unknown device whose details the system did not fully display. Natalie sat beside Marianne while Emily checked, her face beautifully pale, asking as though she did not want to ask, "Emily, Is it possible you used the wrong account to pay for something? I know you manage so many things. Emily looked at her. No. Natalie bit her lip. I'm not saying you did it on purpose. I've seen you log in so many times, and you seemed really stressed about your mom's medication costs. Marianne started crying as soon as she heard the words medication costs. Frank stood behind her chair with a hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. Daniel looked at Emily as though he wanted her to give an explanation that could save everyone. Lily sat silent, gripping her phone. Emily said she could prove she did not do it, that she needed time, a more detailed history from the bank, a chance to check devices. But her words sounded dry and unpleasant against Marianne's crying. Natalie handed Marianne a tissue and no longer looked at Emily. The room had the image it needed to believe. Natalie caring, Marianne hurting. Emily with the laptop and the bank account, too close to the money, too familiar with the passwords. Frank finally said, "For now, you shouldn't manage your mother's account anymore." For now, a soft word for cutting a hand. Emily looked at the medical folder she had once organized on the table. Every note in her handwriting, every bill she had saved from being mischarged, and felt herself being removed from the role of caregiver by the very paperwork that proved she had cared. Daniel added, "And you need to apologize to Natalie for suspecting her all this time. Look what this has done to Mom." Emily picked up the folder. "I'll go," she said to Marianne, but her mother would not look directly at her. That night, light snow fell over Columbus, not enough to cover the ground, only enough to make the street shine coldly. Emily went out to her car with the file box in her arms and sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. Her phone lit up with a message from Lily. "I don't know who to believe, but Natalie has never done anything to hurt me." Emily read it, turned the phone face down, and for the first time felt that the house behind her was no longer a home, but a place where she had worked unpaid for far too long. Aunt Susan came to Emily's apartment 2 days later, with chicken soup in a glass container and a bag of bread, saying nothing too soft when Emily opened the door. Susan was Marianne's older sister, widowed, living alone in Dayton, a woman with neatly cut silver hair and the kind of gaze that made liars feel they were talking too much. She stepped inside, set the soup on the table, looked at Emily's unusually messy apartment, the medical folder on a chair, the open laptop, the cold cup of tea, and said, "You look like someone trying to win a trial by hating herself first." Emily let out a dry laugh and nearly cried. "Do you believe me?" Susan took off her coat and hung it over a chair. "I believe something doesn't fit, and I believe you're too used to begging to be believed." That made Emily sit down. Susan did not hug her right away. She ladled soup into a bowl and set it in front of her. "Eat." Hungry people usually think everything is their fault. Emily ate a few spoonfuls just so her aunt would stop looking at her, then told her everything. From the first text to the envelope, the medical account, Daniel, Natalie. Susan listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, she asked, "Who benefits if the whole family thinks you're not trustworthy?" Emily went still. The question was so simple she felt foolish for not having asked it directly. Susan leaned back in her chair. "There was someone in your uncle's family years ago who was like this. She didn't need to yell, she just needed to cry first. The best liars often don't need to make you look wrong right away. They only need to make you yell first. And then everyone will look at the scream instead of the knife." Emily looked at the laptop. "Have I yelled yet?" "No, but you're close." Susan pushed the laptop toward her. "Then don't yell, build a timeline. What day, what time, who was where, what device, where the money went, who said what. Don't ask your family to believe you through feelings. Your family is addicted to peace and your truth is making them go through withdrawal." That night, Emily opened her work schedule, email, texts, location history, bank statements, screenshots. She created a file named Natalie Sequence and stared at the name Natalie for a long time. Typing someone's name into an evidence file feels like betrayal when you have spent your life being taught to keep the family from cracking. But then she remembered her mother looking away, Daniel saying she was always strong, Natalie handing out tissues like a saint, and she began to type. The first pieces of evidence did not arrive like a flood. They came like stubborn drops of water falling in exactly the right place. One withdrawal happened at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday, when Emily was at the clinic, captured on hallway camera as she led a mother and a feverish child into the waiting room. Nina, Emily's coworker at the clinic, confirmed Emily had not left the building until after 5. A confirmation email for changing the recovery method on the medical account had been sent to Marianne's old secondary email address, an address once logged in on the Hart family iPad. The iPad everyone used for ordering things, looking up recipes, and sometimes letting Lily watch shows. The Wi-Fi history on the router, after Emily asked an IT friend at the clinic to walk her through pulling basic logs, showed Natalie's phone connecting around the same times the account was accessed at least 3 times, on days Natalie said she had stopped by to bring flowers to Marianne. Lily, when Emily questioned her very carefully, remembered Natalie once borrowing the iPad to order wedding flowers because her phone was dead. None of it was enough yet to expose Natalie completely, but it was enough for Emily to know she was not insane. That knowledge made her both relieved and hurt, because if she was not insane, then everyone really had left her alone in front of a lie. She sent Daniel a few points, with no emotion attached, only dates, times, and evidence. He answered 3 hours later, "You're making everything worse. If you have real proof, give it to the bank. Don't drag the whole family into a witch hunt." A witch hunt. Emily stared at the phrase until the letters blurred. Natalie had taught him to name Emily's attempt to save herself in a way that made Emily sound dangerous. Grace Miller answered Emily's message after 4 days of silence. Emily had found her through an old vague social media post where Grace had written, "Some people destroy your life and then call themselves survivors of your toxicity." The post did not name Natalie, but in an old comment someone had mentioned Cincinnati and a name that had later been deleted. Emily sent a brief message, making no accusation, saying only that she needed to understand a pattern. Grace read it and did not reply. On the 4th night, a message appeared. "If you're talking about Natalie Vale, don't meet me anywhere she knows." They met at a diner outside Cincinnati, where blue neon spilled across the windows. The coffee tasted faintly burned, and rain struck the metal roof like fingernails tapping. Grace was in her early 30s, with chin-length hair and a beautiful but tense face, the kind of person who had learned to sit facing the door. She did not shake Emily's hand right away. "I used to be you," Grace said after the waitress left. "Not in a family, in a friend group. I thought Natalie was just hurt. I thought people misunderstood her. I let her stay with me for 3 months." Grace told her Natalie had borrowed money, forgotten to repay it, cried when asked, said Grace humiliated her in front of others. Then a few belongings vanished, a few messages were cut in half, and a payment in Grace's name was reframed out of context. When Grace began to suspect her, Natalie had already told the group that Grace was jealous, controlling, unstable, that she had threatened her. "She doesn't need people to believe the whole thing," Grace said, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "She only needs them to believe I could be that kind of person. After that, everything I say passes through doubt." Emily listened, her chest cold. Grace took a few printed texts, emails, and a voicemail transcript from her bag. "Not enough to sue," she said, "but enough to show how Natalie wrote the story first." "Why did you stay quiet?" Emily asked, then instantly regretted it because the question sounded like blame. Grace did not get angry. She looked out at the rain. "Because once people have called you crazy, you start being afraid every sentence you say will prove them right. And because I was tired. People like Natalie don't just take money or friends. They take your strength to explain." When they parted, Grace said, "Be careful. When she realizes you're getting close, she won't just defend herself. She'll make your search for the truth look like proof that you're dangerous." Emily drove back to Columbus through the rain, her hands tight on the wheel, understanding she had entered the part of the story where turning back would not save her anymore. Natalie struck back before Emily could add Grace to the timeline. She cried to Marianne that Emily was harassing people from her past, contacting a woman who had hurt her in Cincinnati, digging into things it had taken her years to survive. Marianne called Emily in a voice that was no longer angry but tired, the kind of tired that makes the listener feel like the cause of it. "What are you doing?" "Natalie says Grace was the reason she had to move away." "Why would you go looking for someone like that 3 weeks before the wedding?" Emily said. "Did you ask Natalie what Grace actually did?" Marianne went silent. "She said she didn't want to relive it." "So you believe the part she won't tell more than the part I'm trying to prove?" Marianne began crying. "I don't know anymore, Emily. I just want this house to be peaceful." Emily stood in her apartment, looking at the timeline on her screen. "I used to want that too." Daniel sent an even colder text. "If you keep going, I don't want you at the wedding. I don't want you at the wedding." Emily read it and remembered Daniel at 18, Emily at 15, when he forgot his graduation speech, and she stayed up until midnight helping him rewrite it so he would not be laughed at. She remembered the year he broke up with his first girlfriend, when she brought pizza to his room and sat on the floor in silence for 2 hours. Remembered all the times she had been there without needing to be asked. Now she was being removed from his wedding, because she was trying to prove the woman he was about to marry had taken their mother's medication money. She did not answer Daniel. She texted Lily. I need you to remember every time Natalie used the iPad. Lily replied, You're scaring me. Emily wrote back, I'm scared too. For the first time, Lily did not immediately respond by telling her she was overreacting. Lily began to suspect in the Hart laundry room, where the dryer always roared too loudly on the old setting, and the smell of warm towels made it easy to believe everything was still normal. Lily had come home to pick up a few old things when she heard Natalie talking on the phone behind the half-closed door. At first she meant to keep walking because eavesdropping was not her habit, but one sentence stopped her. No, they believe it was Emily. Lily stood still, a bag of clothes in her hand. The dryer rumbled, swallowing several words. Natalie's voice dropped lower. I just need it quiet until after the wedding. A pause. The account is fine, I moved it in pieces. Lily felt her whole body go cold. She took out her phone and started recording, her hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. The recording caught only the end, mixed with the dryer noise, but a few words were clear. After the wedding, account, Emily. Daniel can't know about the loan yet. Natalie opened the door right after that and saw Lily near the towel shelf. For 1 second her face froze, then she smiled. Lily, you scared me. Are you looking for something? Lily stammered that she was looking for an old sweater. Natalie looked at the phone in her hand, then at her face. Are you okay? You look pale. Her calmness frightened Lily more than anything. That night Lily came to Emily's apartment and started crying as soon as the door opened. I think I was wrong, she said, her voice breaking. Emily did not hug her immediately, not because she did not want to, but because something strange and painful moved inside her. Lily only believed because she had heard it herself, while Emily's words had not been enough. Then she saw Lily trembling, saw her youngest sister still too young to understand what it meant to realize she had stood on the wrong side against her own sister, and Emily pulled her inside. They listened to the recording 17 times, increasing the volume, reducing the noise, writing down every word they could hear. Lily cried between each replay, saying, I texted you that. I said Natalie had never done anything to hurt me. Emily watched the waveform rise and fall on the screen. You didn't know yet. Lily shook her head. But you told me. Neither of them had an answer for that. The loan in Daniel's name was the crack that finally kept her brother from standing fully on Natalie's side. From Lily's recording, Emily began searching through wedding emails, venue bills, the deposit that had been higher than expected. Lily quietly asked a friend in banking how to check credit inquiries, and Daniel, after much pressure and an argument so tense, Frank had to stand in the living room saying, Don't make this bigger, like a spell that had lost its power, agreed to pull his credit report. There was an $18,000 personal loan he did not remember signing, used to pay the deposit on the more expensive wedding venue and a jewelry purchase. The electronic signature looked enough like his to fool a stranger, but Daniel saw immediately that the D was slightly wrong, like an imitation learned from birthday cards. The IP address in the loan file matched the apartment Natalie had rented before moving things into Daniel's house. Security footage from the jewelry store, after Emily and Lily contacted them with Daniel's written authorization, showed Natalie standing at the counter that afternoon in a pale blue coat, her hair tied low, using the card linked to the loan to buy something expensive. Daniel watched the footage on Emily's laptop, his face white. Natalie in the video smiled at the sales associate, tilted her head, touched her throat the way she always did when complimented. No one was forcing her. There were no tears, there was no Emily in the frame, just Natalie and a transaction. Daniel stood from the chair and went into Emily's kitchen, placing both hands on the sink as though he might be sick. Emily did not follow right away. Part of her wanted him to stand alone with the consequences of not believing her. Another part still remembered he was her brother. Finally she stood in the kitchen doorway. Daniel said, his voice rough, I let her call you jealous. Emily said nothing. I said you couldn't stand that I was chosen. Emily still said nothing. Daniel turned back, his eyes red. Say something. She looked at him for a long time. Do you want me to make you feel better about me? The sentence struck him like a blow. No, then stand in it. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in her life, Emily did not step forward to fix his feelings. Natalie suggested a healing dinner before the wedding, at exactly the moment she felt the wires around her beginning to tremble. She told Marianne she did not want to enter marriage with the family divided, that she was willing to forgive Emily if Emily could admit she had let fear of losing her brother make her behave badly. Marianne, who still did not know everything about Daniel's loan but had heard enough to lose sleep, clung to the dinner like a final float. Frank said everyone needed to sit down and talk like decent people. Daniel did not object, but he no longer stood as firmly as before. Lily texted Emily, "This is a trap, but maybe it's also the right place," Aunt Susan said over the phone. "If she's using the dinner table as a stage, then bring the lights." Emily prepared all day. She did not choose a pretty dress. She wore a gray sweater, black pants, and tied her hair low, as if going in for a difficult record shift, not revenge. She printed every set of evidence and placed colored tabs on them. Medical account, wedding envelope, Wi-Fi, work schedule, Grace, Lily, Daniel's loan, jewelry store camera. She wrote a one-page timeline, not starting from the moment she was hurt, but from the moment Natalie had opportunity. She put everything into a black folder. Before leaving her apartment, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at her own face. She did not look victorious. She looked tired, but her eyes no longer asked permission. The dinner took place at the Hart house. At the same wooden table Emily had wiped after countless meals, beneath the same slightly crooked yellow ceiling light, with the smell of Marianne's favorite roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, low candles, and red wine. Natalie wore a pale blue dress and light makeup, looking like someone who had cried earlier but was trying to be strong for everyone. She sat beside Daniel, but that night Daniel did not place his hand behind her chair. Marianne noticed and looked down at her plate. Frank poured water for too long. Lily sat near Emily, both hands under the table. Aunt Susan had also come, claiming she wanted to see everyone before the wedding, and sat at the end of the table like a witness. Natalie had not invited, but no one dared remove. Natalie began after a few minutes of silence. "I know tonight is hard," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "I don't want this family to keep going like this. I love Daniel, I love all of you, and even though these past weeks have hurt me deeply, I don't want to bring bitterness into my marriage." Marianne was crying before the food went cold. Natalie turned to Emily, eyes red. "I forgive you if you can admit that jealousy and fear clouded your judgment. I don't need you punished, I just need you to stop." Frank exhaled as though relieved that a soft path had opened. "Emily," he said in the old voice that had shut down so many arguments with carpeted gentleness, "maybe it's time to let this go." Emily looked at her father, then her mother, then Daniel, then Lily. She placed the folder on the table. The sound of hard cover against wood was small, but the room changed completely. Natalie looked at the folder, and for 1 second Emily saw the corner of her eye tighten. Not with pain, but calculation. Emily did not yell. She opened the first folder. "I don't need you to believe me anymore," she said, her voice low but clear. "I just need you to look." She placed her clinic work schedule on the table beside the 2:17 p.m. withdrawal and the hallway camera image from the clinic with its timestamp. "This transaction is marked EH. I was at the clinic. Nina confirms it, the camera confirms it." Natalie inhaled. "One transaction doesn't prove." Emily placed down the second sheet. 3 other transactions match logins from this house's Wi-Fi while Natalie's phone was connected. Here are the device logs. Here's the recovery method change email sent to the secondary address that was logged in on the family iPad. Lily confirms Natalie borrowed that iPad. Marianne put a hand over her mouth. Frank narrowed his eyes at the papers as if the words might change if he stared hard enough. Natalie began to cry. "I don't understand what you're doing. All this technical stuff." Emily placed the transcript of the recording down, then played a short clip from her phone. The dryer roared, distorted, then Natalie's voice cut through the noise. "No, they believe it was Emily, after the wedding, account. Daniel can't know about the loan yet." Daniel closed his eyes. Natalie turned toward him immediately. "Daniel, I can explain." "That's not." Emily placed the loan file in front of him. An $18,000 loan, forged electronic signature, IP from Natalie's apartment. Here's the bank confirmation. Here are the jewelry store camera images. She slid the photo across the table. In the image, Natalie stood under the store lights, signing a receipt, smiling. Marianne made a small sound, not crying, but as if air had been forced out of her lungs. Natalie looked at the photo, then at Daniel. "I did it for us," she said quickly. "The venue deposit had to be paid. You were stressed. I didn't want you to worry. I was going to pay it back." Daniel looked at her as if seeing her face without light for the first time. "Did you forge my signature?" Natalie was silent. 1 beat, 2 beats. The silence was not long, but it was enough for the wedding to die on the table. "Daniel," Natalie whispered. "You have to understand." "Yes or no?" he asked. His voice was not loud. Because it was not loud, Natalie had nothing to cling to. She cried harder and turned toward Marianne. "Mom, Hart, I was scared. I just wanted everything to be beautiful. Emily hated me from the beginning. She made me feel pushed." Aunt Susan cut in, her voice sharp. "No, you don't get to jump from a forged signature to feeling disliked. Stay with the question." Natalie looked at her. and for the first time the softness fell from her face long enough to reveal something cold. Emily placed Grace's statement on the table. Grace Miller, old messages, same pattern. Borrow money, cut context, call someone unstable before they can speak. Natalie shot to her feet. You went looking for that crazy bitch? You actually. Then she stopped, because her own voice had turned too sharp, too different from the image she had built in this room. Lily was crying but still looking at Natalie. Frank pressed a hand to his forehead. Marianne stared at the medical statement, her lips trembling. Did you take my medication money? She asked, very softly. Natalie looked at her, and in that moment Emily saw her calculate what role was left to play. She chose the last one. I don't have anyone, Natalie said, choking on sobs. I was afraid of losing all of you. I was afraid if you knew I was struggling financially, you would leave me. Emily always made me feel. Don't, Marianne said. One very small word, but it cut through Natalie harder than any shout. Don't use Emily to answer that question. Natalie collapsed back into her chair. Daniel took the ring off his hand and placed it on the table. He did not throw it, there was no spectacle, he simply set it down, and the sound of metal against wood made Marianne begin to sob. After the truth, the Hart house did not become peaceful again. The wedding was cancelled within 2 days, without a long announcement, only a short email to guests saying it was due to family and legal reasons. Natalie disappeared from Daniel's apartment before the police made official contact, leaving behind a few pieces of clothing, a makeup box, and the smell of her perfume in the bathroom like a taunt. Through a lawyer, she said she had been under emotional pressure, controlled by the Hart family's expectations, that she had felt forced to make everything perfect, and that all financial actions needed to be understood in the context of emotional coercion. Daniel read the letter at his parents' kitchen table, his face gray, then tore it only halfway and stopped because his hands were shaking. Marianne could not stop crying in those first days, not only because of the medication money, not only because of the wedding, but because she remembered every time she had called Natalie daughter, every time she had told Emily to be softer, every time she had handed tissues to the person who had taken the money for her treatment. Frank moved around the house like a man who had aged in a single week, opening his mouth many times in front of Emily and then falling silent, because I'm sorry felt too small beside all the times he had said, don't make this bigger. Lily sent Emily many messages, some only saying I'm sorry, some long explanations she typed, deleted, then sent again. Emily read all of them but did not answer right away. She no longer had the strength to become the place where everyone sent their remorse so they could feel lighter. Marian came to Emily's apartment on a cold, rainy afternoon, carrying the box of medical files Emily had taken from the house. She stood at the door, smaller inside her brown coat, her eyes swollen, both hands trembling around the handles of the bag. Emily opened the door but did not step back immediately to let her in. That moment stretched long enough for Marianne to understand something had changed. I brought the files, she said, her voice hoarse. I don't know where to start. Emily took the box. I'm going to transfer everything to a patient record management service. They can help you with payments and reminders. I'll send you the information. Marianne looked at her as though she had lost something else. You don't want to manage it anymore? Emily held the box against her chest. No, I don't blame you, I just. Marianne started crying. I should have known my own daughter. Emily looked at her mother and saw a woman who had been ill, tired, deceived, but also a woman who had turned away when Emily needed to be seen. Love and anger stood inside her, neither willing to leave. You should have asked me before believing someone else about me, Emily said. Marianne nodded, crying silently. I'm sorry. Emily wanted those words to make her lighter, but they only placed another object in her hands, one she did not want to hold yet. I know, she said. Not it's okay, not I forgive you, only I know. Marianne stood at the door for a few more seconds as if waiting for her daughter to open it wider. Emily did not. When her mother left, Emily set the file box on the table, opened it, looked at her colored tabs, then closed it again. A piece of her life was inside that box. Not her mother's, not Natalie's, not the family's, but the part of Emily that had once believed love meant holding everything so no one else had to be afraid. She had done it so well that when she was suspected, all they remembered was that she had the keys. Daniel came a few days after Marianne. He texted first asking if they could meet and Emily answered. At the door. He stood in the hallway outside her apartment, his coat unzipped, his eyes hollow, stubble on his face like a man who had forgotten to look in the mirror. I chose the wrong person, he said after a while without circling around it. Emily rested a hand on the edge of the door. No, you chose the easier story to believe. Daniel swallowed. I loved her. I know, she made me feel. He stopped, ashamed because the sentence sounded foolish now. Needed, Emily said for him. Daniel looked at her. Yeah, and I made you feel reminded. He closed his eyes. Emily, it's fine, I understand the mechanism, Natalie cried. You protected her. I brought paperwork, you felt judged. Natalie told you you were a good man. I reminded you to buy Mom a birthday gift. It happens. Her words were not as bitter as she expected. They were tired, Daniel cried, one tear only, then wiped it quickly. I don't know how to fix this. Emily looked at her brother, who had once been part of her sense of home, and now stood outside her door like a guest. You don't fix it by making me tell you each step. Go to therapy. Talk to Mom. Look at why you needed to protect someone by refusing to hear me. And don't ask me to come back to the dinner table so everyone can feel less awful. Daniel nodded, too hurt to speak. Before he left, he said, I miss you, Emily answered. You miss the person who made everything easier for you. Daniel looked as though he wanted to argue, but he could not find a sentence that was not selfish. He left. Emily closed the door gently, not forever, but firmly enough for the person on the other side to understand that the door belonged to her now. A year later, the Hart family tried Sunday dinner again for the first time after months of broken intervals. No one called it going back to normal, because even Frank had learned that certain soft words could insult the truth. Emily arrived 17 minutes late, not because of traffic but because she had sat in the car outside the house long enough for her hands to stop feeling cold. She brought a store-bought salad, not the 3 dishes she used to cook, not a cake, not the potatoes Marianne liked. Marianne took the salad container with both hands, gave a strained smile, and said nothing. The table was still the old table, the scratch in the wood still near the place Emily used to sit, the scratch Lily had made at 10 years old by pressing scissors too hard into paper. Daniel had arrived before her and sat quietly, with no chair beside him for Natalie. Frank poured water for everyone, carefully to the point of awkwardness. Lily told a small story about her new job, her voice a little too bright, then went quiet. No one mentioned Natalie, but not mentioning her did not make her disappear. She was in the space between Daniel and Marianne, in the way Frank no longer said, "Don't make this bigger." In the way Lily looked at Emily before smiling. In the way Marianne asked whether Emily wanted more water with the voice of someone afraid even a normal question might touch a scar. Emily ate a little, answered a few questions, asked about her mother's health without going so deep that she took the files back into her hands. When dinner ended, she did not stand up immediately to clear the table. The old habit tugged at her hand. Plates needed gathering, glasses needed washing, the salad container needed putting away. She stayed seated. Marianne looked at her, then stood and took a plate herself. Daniel stood too, Lily stood. Frank turned on the faucet. The sounds of dishes touching one another felt unfamiliar. Like the house was learning a language Emily had translated for free for too long. She stayed another 10 minutes, then said she had to go. Marianne did not try to stop her. Daniel walked out to the porch with her but said nothing. Emily stood outside in her zipped coat, looking through the glass at the yellow-lit kitchen, where her family moved slowly around a table that no longer pretended to be whole. Once, she had believed family was where truth did not need proof. Now she knew blood did not automatically recognize the honest one if the lie cried beautifully enough. She had taken her name back in that house. Taken back the truth. Taken back the right not to apologize when she had done nothing wrong. But she had lost something no file could record, the feeling of belonging without having to be on guard. She stepped down from the porch, hearing behind her the faint clink of dishes, running water, Marianne saying something softly to Lily. There was no warm ending, no family embrace, no miracle turning truth into healing. There was only Emily Hart walking into the cold night, alive, clearer, less soft, and no longer willing to be the quietest person in the room so everyone else could be comfortable.